So I have two 911s sitting in my garage right now, two completely different cars, and quite frankly, they couldn't sound more different. One is my 1972 Albert Blue 911T. It is old school. It sounds amazing when it's idling. It sounds great as you're driving around town, and it absolutely sings when you're high up in the rev range. It is the definition of analog, and the motor speaks to you with every thump of the cylinder. On the other hand, I have my 2005 911 997 base Carrera. This is a much more modern, civilized car. It's water-cooled, where my 911T is air-cooled. It's reliable, it's dependable, it's a daily driver. And quite frankly, it sounds a little boring. To drive, it is fantastic, but I miss that sound emanating from the back, through the rear seats, when I have the windows down, really enjoying how the car talks to me from an audio standpoint. My 997 just doesn't have it. So here's the mission here. I want to take my water-cooled 911 and I want to make it sound like my air-cooled 911, or as close to as possible. Now, can I make it sound exactly like my 50-year-old Porsche? Not really, but I think you're going to be very surprised about how close I can get. I'm Derek, this is 11 After 9, and this channel exists to give you honest, down-to-earth advice about buying and selling these amazing cars. And that's coming from someone that owns them, drives them, and lives with them every day. So for the new folks out there, maybe we can ask, why is my water-cooled car so quiet? So you've all heard of the difference between air-cooled and water-cooled. Up until 1999 or so, all 911s were cooled by a mixture of oil and air. They had an 11-blade fan that would spin up to crazy RPMs to keep this contraption cool, and the sound and the gnashing of gears coming from behind your head was something that, well, frankly, it's what put air-cooled cars on the map. And I think that as much as people love the old-school drive of those cars, I think the sound is probably equally as important to many people. Or from a power standpoint, Porsche was coming to a point where they couldn't extract that much more horsepower, and so they joined the rest of the world and went water-cooled. So that, plus extra sound deadening as the car slowly became more of a GT cruiser comfortable sports car, all added to this level of insulation that just took you away from being in the car, from feeling the anger of the car coming from the motor from a sound point of view. And that's what I'm hoping to rediscover. So, first step, we can change the induction noise of the motor. So essentially, the 997 came with an air box that was a big clunky plastic thing, and the air would have to come in through the rear deck lid, go through the air filter, into the motor. Lots of different passages, a long way for the air to go, all of which muffles the sound. So for people looking for a little bit of drama, we have to pull that thing out and put in what they call a cold air intake made by a company called FabSpeed. Now, believe it or not, this is one that I found on Facebook Marketplace. It's an older FabSpeed version made of carbon fiber, and it was sold to me by an unbelievably kind man named Stuart, who turned out to be a fan of 11 After 9 and took me on a great tour of his workshop. I picked it up for about $350. If you wanted to go with the new FabSpeed version, which has two carbon fiber inlets with two filters, that runs brand new around $1,200. That induction sound I'm looking for, the growl of the motor as it's sucking in atmosphere and mixing it with gasoline for the perfect explosion, that's the sound I'm going for. But is it going to get me all the way to where I want to be? No. This is going to be part one. The real heavy lifting on changing the sound is going to come from the exhaust. And that's going to be part two of this series when I swap in a Pfister exhaust to really take this car home. So let me get to showing you how I put it in, one of the big problems that I found out buying used, and then I'm going to let you hear what this does to the car, and it is pretty cool. So the first very important point is you want to make sure this car is stone cold before you work on it. You're going to be reaching all over the engine bay, and a hot flat 6 will happily take the skin right off your hands. So work from a cold car in the garage or back it out and shut it right off. After popping the engine compartment, you can see that the 997 is one of the last cars that you can actually see the motor and work on the motor, so that's nice. And the first step is going to be loosening the clamps to where the airbox feeds into the throttle. After you loosen that all up, it's going to be important to unplug the wiring for the mass airflow sensor. This is a sensor that reads the air coming in from the outside so that the car can properly mix the fuel for the perfect mixture. After I unplug it, I tuck it away. This would be a whole lot easier if you skip the big chunky Apple Watch and you've been blessed with small, nimble little hands. I was blessed with neither of these things. I have hands roughly the size of an orangutan, so just give me a second here. So here I'm pulling the intake hose off of the throttle body and I'm unclipping the oil filler neck in the tube from the airbox. You really want to be gentle here, and I mean really gentle, because the plastic filler tube gets brittle as it gets older and it loves to crack on you. If you were considering while you're in the repair, swapping this out wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. So after removing a couple retaining screws, the airbox comes out, and you can finally see the motor sitting back there breathing on its own. I filmed this a few weeks ago, and it was very late spring in New England, and there's a whole winter's worth of New England road grit hiding back there. So I just took a couple minutes with a vacuum before anything went back in. I just didn't want to seal all that junk back up, and I'd love to keep the motor as clean as possible. So the next thing I had to do is remove the mass airflow sensor off of the old airbox, and to do that, you need a star bit. But I want to warn all of you, you do not use a regular star bit. Porsche used what they call a security Torx. It kind of has this little pin sticking up in the center, and so if you have a regular bit, it has to have a hole in the end to clear that pin. A standard Torx or star bit won't even sit down in there. The reason I share that with you is if you're like me, you're doing this project on a Sunday afternoon, and you run into that and you don't have the right bit, and hopefully Harbor Freight's open. But classic example of running into a roadblock for something you weren't expecting. Speaking of things that you weren't expecting, we're going to be installing the little bracket that mounts up underneath the oil filler neck, and that's what's going to hold the carbon fiber heat shield in. It screws right in. Seems really simple, until you move to the next step and realize you have a problem. So the heat shield goes in next, and it drops down into these little rubber grommets so it sits nice and secure on the body of the car, and then at the top it's held in place by this mount. Well, except it didn't. Watch this. The whole thing is just kind of floating there, and it took me a minute to figure out why. Turns out the bracket that came with this kit was actually bent. It wasn't sitting flat, and so the heat shield had nothing solid to sit down on. It was kind of pulling it up away from the body. So I did what any reasonable person would do. I took it over to my vise, grabbed a 2-pound sledge, and applied a little bit of honest persuasion until it was straight again. Popped it back in, and now it sits exactly the way it's supposed to. So we can make the point that anytime you buy something used, you run the risk of having something like this happen or missing parts. And I certainly believe that Stuart did not know that this bracket was bent because he bought the car with it already installed. And so luckily we were able to fix it and move forward. And so now that carbon fiber shield is finally happy, and the carbon fiber intake pipe goes onto the throttle body. Once you put the clamps on that and torque them down, we're moving on to just the last few steps. The reusable filter clamps onto the end of the pipe, and everything gets snugged down to spec. And the wiring that feeds into the mass airflow sensor plugs back in, which now lives here in the new intake. And folks, that's pretty much the whole job. So just for fun, let's rate this job. For 11 after 9, let's make this scale out of 7, and we're going to make it swear jars. 0 to 1 swear jar might be putting air in your tires, whereas a 7 swear jar is pulling a motor out. So this job should take you roughly an hour and a half. If you run into any issues like I did, maybe 2. And I'd probably put it at 3 swear jars. God knows when I found the bent bracket and when I realized I needed that security Torx bit, I might have let 1 or 2 slip. All right, so here's the part you're all waiting for, the payoff. I want to walk you through how I actually captured this sound, because the one thing I can't stand is, despite best of intentions, a lot of videos out there will just have someone standing on the side of the road and have the car fly by at 40 miles an hour, so you get like 1.5 seconds of maybe hearing what the motor sounds like. Or you have the camera behind the car as it takes off into the distance in front of you, and that also only gives you a few seconds of maybe what it sounds like. So what I did is I used studio quality microphones, and I have one suction cupped on the outside of the car right by the exhaust, and I have the other one on the other channel in the actual engine bay, so you can hear what the motor and the airbox actually sounds like. I have those piped into a professional DAT recorder, so I can have that sound and sync it up with the video, so you can actually hear, in an absolute best case scenario, what that car sounds like. Then, what I wanted to do was give you a comparison of what the car was like before we added the cold air intake, and then after, from the driver's seat. And I have a fantastic set of what they call binaural earphones, and essentially they're 2 small microphones that sit inside my ears and mimic exactly what I'm hearing as we drive the car. So between those 2 ways of capturing the sound, you're going to get both sides of the coin. You're going to get the stock version outside and inside, and then after we had the cold air intake. So here's what I actually found. Getting in the car and starting to drive around town, kind of heading out to some of the roads I was going to film on, I was initially really disappointed. I noticed almost no difference, not in power, certainly not in sound. And I was like, what is up with this? Everyone's talking about cold air intakes and they just don't seem to work. The cabin sound was almost exactly the same, and from my butt dyno, it didn't feel any different. But when I got to somewhere where I could actually open it up, and when I went full throttle, the sound was glorious. Coming on camera on 5,000 RPM, the engine started to howl, and it went to this unbelievable angry crescendo that actually hurt my ears getting to 7,000 RPM. That flat 6 comes through absolutely perfectly, and I have to tell you, it is a little addicting. I also noticed a little bit of a horsepower bump. The car felt faster. I think the torque curve was slightly changed. Now, full disclosure, this is all completely subjective, right? But it is kind of amazing to me how when you change the sound of the car, you change the soundtrack, the car actually does feel faster. It feels more engaging. Maybe it's because the motor was able to breathe a little bit more deeply now that that big airbox isn't in the way. I don't totally know, but subjectively for me, this thing made an absolute difference, especially up top. So did I turn my 997 into an air-cooled 911 in an afternoon? Well, no, not exactly, but we're getting there. But did it get a little bit more raw? Did it get a little bit more exciting? Do I look forward to driving it just a little bit more? Yeah, absolutely. And we're only one step into this. So stay with me as we continue on in this journey and I add my Pfister exhaust to the equation. That's where I think the real transformation is going to come. And if I think the cold air intake took me maybe 20% towards where I want to be, that Pfister exhaust is going to take me a whole lot further, and I'm really excited to show that to you. If this helped, that's what 11 After 9 is here for. Hit subscribe, and I'll keep showing up. I'm Derek. This is 11 After 9. Stop waiting for life to happen. Get out there and drive.